Hey, what's up? There's a difference between digital veganism and real-world veganism. Just as there's a difference between digital activism and real-world political activism. And that's okay. That's not something to feel guilty about. That's not something to beat yourself up about. But one of the questions I had coming into me from some of the guys who are in Thailand right now, these Western entrepreneurs in Thailand who are part of the online phenomenon of the Thai Fruit Festival, part of this high-profile new vegan movement. The question they sent to me was, look, what can we do now? Given the critique I'd already presented, given the concerns I've already raised, given the danger that digital veganism is slipping further and further away from the core concerns that define veganism. Given that real veganism is not about looking good in a bikini, that it's not about buying an expensive bicycle and riding it over 100 kilometers a day in Thailand, given that the core concerns and issues of veganism have nothing to do with being on a kind of permanent vacation or presenting to the world on Instagram a phony life of luxury, athleticism, relaxation, beauty, you name it. That those issues are marginal to veganism best. What can we do now? And I gave a really sincere answer. To be honest, I hesitated. I kind of asked myself, am I going to really give a sincere answer or not? I gave an answer that was both specifically geared to digital veganism as something that exists in its own right on YouTube, connected to the real world, but only tenuously. And I also gave an answer that specifically reflected the geographical reality that we're talking about a certain community of entrepreneurs, some of whom are in Thailand, some of whom are in California, people who have the potential to make a difference, and people who already are making a difference, who already are successful in their way, but who are definitely not connected to social and political reality in any one place. As I've already mentioned at length, the vegans who are in northern Thailand have shockingly little connection to the real-world issues in northern Thailand. And whether or not that's a problem, it's also definitely an opportunity. So that was the question that was put to me. What can we do now? Given the bits and pieces we have to work with, positively, constructively, what can we do? Given the critique, given the issues, but also given the opportunities. Now, for digital veganism and for the entrepreneurs who are spread all over the world, this is my answer. And my answer, at first it may seem a little bit strange, but it reflects positive examples that you can draw from both real-world politics and real-world religious organizations. You can also contrast it to negative examples from the same two fields, from politics and religion. The honest answer I gave was, look, vegans in this situation, vegans on YouTube, digital vegans, they can build a news service. They can build a talk show similar to TYT, similar to the Young Turks. The Young Turks is one of the most famous and successful news discussion programs on the internet. It's been around for more than 10 years. You can Google it really quickly. Now, a lot of people might be shocked that I said, wait a minute. You're not contrasting something real to something fake. You're just talking about a different type of emphasis. Well, when you have an engagement with real-world issues, any kind of sincere reporting, sincere debating, etc. And I'm not picking an impossibly high standard here to compare what's going on in veganism. The Young Turks is a very casual format for debate and discussion of current political issues. But when you put up that kind of content, when you show concern and engagement with real-world political issues, and of course, vegans would not be engaged with quite the same issues as the Young Turks, that have more interest in ecology, more interest in some selection of issues. You define your mandate however you want to define it. When you come back week after week and just show a sober, sincere engagement with those issues, when you make mistakes and you come back in the next episode a week later and apologize and have a correction showing, look, we messed up last week, here are the facts on that issue. Whatever it is, even at that lowest level of just discussion of the facts that come out, what you build is a constituency in the old-fashioned political sense. The people who watch your program, and all kinds of people who are not vegan, will be drawn in just because you're doing, again, good reporting or good discussion of what other people have reported, good disclosure of the facts, whatever it is you're doing. If you have a fact-based program with a vegan perspective implicitly built into that, or once in a while the veganism comes to the fore, if you just have a group of vegans doing what the Young Turks are already doing, you will build a constituency. People who really are supporting your political direction will over time select themselves, step up, and want to support you in that program. And now the Young Turks is a positive example in that their big political accomplishment, their big political achievement is that they spun off an anti-corruption program that's called WolfPAC, Wolf PAC. And that's an anti-corruption political movement to try to reform legislation that defines how donations are accepted by politicians in the United States. And that's a very specific issue with a very narrow constituency in the U.S. There's no way you could pitch a TV show saying, we're going to build a news program that just appeals to people who are outraged about political corruption. There's no audience for that. There's no way you can say, we're going to be the internet news show that talks about the things that matter to people who want financial reform in the American political system. That's a tiny audience. But what they did is they built a generally respectable, factual show, engaged with all kinds of political issues. And then within that broad audience, they built a hardcore political constituency who will really support these efforts to reform the American electoral system. And compared to anything else that's happened in the last 25 years in American politics, they have been remarkably successful. No joke. If you want to look into it, you can. Okay, you may well say TYT is a holotype. It's a unique example, and its uniqueness means that it can't be reproduced. Well, I disagree because of my experience in Asia, my experience with Asian politics, and my experience with Buddhism, Confucianism, other Asian religions. Something for you to Google is the New Tang Dynasty Network. They abbreviate that as NTD, New Tang Dynasty. That started off as a politically persecuted group of Buddhists, people involved with traditional Chinese religion, whether or not you wanted to, probably not best to say Buddhism in the narrow definition of the idea of Buddhism. They started their own news network, and their religious movement that in many ways nobody took seriously and that nobody regarded as politically credible, they built up political credibility for. Basically, their bias is that they support democracy and that they're critical of the current government of China, of mainland China. They're not left-wing, like a lot of Chinese traditionalists. They're into respecting your grandparents and some other conservative values, but conservative from a Chinese perspective. Very hard for a Western to relate to that in terms of left and right. Now, New Tang Dynasty, if you look up their stuff, you can find them through YouTube. You can find short clips. But they are a broadcast news network. They do documentaries. They do interviews with academics. They do all kinds of things. And they broadcast over satellite TV around the world. In many ways, they're much more successful and professional looking than the Young Turks. Much more serious in tone. And they are not a unique example. On the tiny island of Taiwan, Taiwan is a small, crowded nation. It's actually a long list of TV news programs, news networks, channels that are operated by different religious groups and different dissident groups. Sometimes people who've run away from China, sometimes groups that were always in Taiwan, and so on. And again, the interesting thing is, just by talking in a transparent, down-to-earth way about real-world events, all those groups prove again and again, you build up a constituency. You make the connections with like-minded people, and those like-minded people may donate money to your cause. It may be that, like the Young Turks, you spin off a separate political organization or whatever it is. Yeah. So that was my honest answer to the question of what can happen now to make the situation with digital veganism better. Yes, you could have some kind of meaningful current events talk show. Young Turks calls it the talk show. We're not even talking about original primary source journalism. If you got 5 people or 10 people together who could really cooperate, who all happen to be vegan, and who wanted to put something on YouTube that's really substantive, that is not about buying expensive bicycles, that is not about how good you look in a bikini, that is engaged with real-world issues anywhere in the world. Now, where it is in the world would change your mandate and how you define it from day one. If I were doing a project like that in Canada, based in Ottawa, the capital city of Canada, I would be looking at a service that would talk a lot about First Nations issues, about Indigenous people's politics. Obviously, if you're in any specific country, you're going to want to look at agriculture in that country, deforestation, politics of animal rights to some extent. You would define the mandate, the issues that are in and the issues that are out. If it was a news service based in Chiang Mai, if you were putting together a bunch of vegans to do original research and original opinions and react to what's going on, how you define that, be up in the air. You'd have to make some hard decisions, and you'd have to have people who come on really discuss, look, what's on the table, what are we going to report on, and what aren't we going to report on. And what I'm suggesting here is not a vegan news show. Actually, there's a YouTuber called Carrie McCarpet, and she, as one woman alone, is currently doing a vegan news show where she just talks about vegan issues that have popped up in the mainstream media. So recent controversies with Beyonce deciding she's vegan and these kinds of things that happen to pop in the newspaper. That's not really what I'm talking about here, although that's very praiseworthy in its way. But yeah, let me say this. Some of the people who have written to me from northern Thailand in response to my recent critique of what's been going on there, some of them have said, in effect, look, what we're doing may be shallow and it may be vain. It may be all about good-looking people in bikinis and expensive bicycles. But we want to think of this as an advertisement for veganism, that we're showing beauty, luxury, a life of self-indulgence, and that advertises veganism. And my response to that is no. What you're showing is a meaningless life, and you're advertising veganism as the means to that life. And that plays into some shallow cult bullshit, man. And a lot of people in this game, they can't see the harm in it. They can't see the harm of getting on YouTube and promising you a weight loss miracle, promising you that you'll be more attractive, promising you that you'll make more money, that you'll be happier by being vegan, that you'll have unearned riches, that you're going to work a 4-hour work week and you're going to unlock your potential through the power of positive thinking. That's not a slippery slope to some cult bullshit. That already is some cult bullshit. And that does not build a constituency. Selling diet books may be a wonderful business, does not build a constituency this way. All right? What I'm talking about is the opposite, where you're not celebrating the most meaningless, vain indulgences of the vegan lifestyle. Right? And you're not promoting to people, hey, if you become vegan, you too can live on permanent vacation in Chiang Mai. You too can live a life of constant self-indulgence and infinite abundance and all this other stuff that on some level everyone knows you can't deliver on. You know, look, hey, this promised lifestyle in northern Thailand, you guys who are making YouTube videos promoting this, if you really believed in it, why are you preaching it to me? Why are you preaching it to white people in the Western world? Why are you telling me to buy an airplane ticket to go to northern Thailand. I've already been there and done that. I've already been on a bicycle and gone more than 100 kilometers. I already know what that's like. But I wasn't doing it for meaningless reasons, okay? If you believed in that lifestyle, and if you believe that people could have abundance and a higher income and the power of positive, why don't you preach that to the people who work at the fruit market, to the peasants who are growing your food? Why don't you preach that? Why don't you bring that message as a charity to people who have crossed the border from Cambodia into Thailand, from Myanmar into Thailand, who are living in poverty there? Why don't you set up an NGO locally to bring that message to the people who need it and to the people whom it would help if it worked? Instead of trying to sell it to people who already have money, who already have leisure, white, wealthy Western people who can buy an airplane ticket and pretend to dissimulate the lifestyle you're selling as the payoff for turning vegan, with a whole bunch of distractions, with a whole bunch of vain indulgences that have nothing to do with the core issues of compassion, ecology, ethics, you name it. Trying to stay positive. Real world veganism is different from digital veganism. And I accept that. And I'm not here to hate on people because the illusion they present on Instagram is not the same as their real life. Digital veganism is not the same as real world veganism. There are people here, the city I live in Canada, and their idea of vegan activism is, like literally smashing cages and, like literally carrying out sabotage. And when I meet those people, because that's real world, that's not digital veganism. When I meet those people, what I say to them is, look, I've never met a vegan where I thought the best thing you can do with your future to make a difference is spending a couple years in jail. That's what you're doing. I'm against that kind of activism, partly because I don't think it's a good use of your time to go to jail, no matter what symbolic value you may imagine committing crimes going to jail from them. Okay? That's bad advice. I don't advise any kind of violent or illegal action or protest in real life. I also don't think you should take the back door into City Hall when you haven't tried the front door yet. All these political issues, all these ethical issues, all these concerns that are central to veganism, you've got to try doing the legal, ethical, public form of engagement. And only after you've exhausted that should you even look at bending the rules. And in a country like Canada, have you ever taken a complaint to City Hall? I have, a million years ago when I was living in Toronto. There are ways we can engage in these issues publicly and responsibly in terms of real-life vegan activism. Now, digital activism has drifted so far from that range of options and issues I've just described, City Hall through to people going out and trying to sabotage a mink farm. That's the way Gary Yourofsky got famous in the first place. He went to jail because he sabotaged a mink farm. It's a crime. Okay? That range of issues over here, the range we're looking at on YouTube and Instagram and with digital veganism is so disconnected. It's so far away. Why wouldn't one reflect the other? Even if critically, even if your program on YouTube is asking the question, look, is this really, should people really be putting themselves in jail to sabotage a mink farm? How can we allow veganism to drift so far away from its core issues and become a celebration of, look at my new manicure, don't I look hot in this new swimsuit? Here are me and my wealthy friends wasting money or wasting our parents' money to ride around on a Bianchi bicycle that's manufactured in Italy while I'm in Southeast Asia and editing out the poverty and the filth and the struggle that's just out of the frame. Look, on a really fundamental level, I can sympathize with all these people, okay? I think that veganism is such a fundamentally important issue that there is almost no wrong way to talk about it. That any discussion, any debate of this kind is making a positive contribution that any noise about veganism is better than the silence that we're all struggling against. But when people have come to me with this question, how can we do better in digital veganism, on YouTube, on the net? How can we, so this doesn't include me, but how can we, as a group of entrepreneurs and YouTube personalities in northern Thailand and California, how can we do something better? I'd say, hey, look at the Young Turks. Look at New Tang Dynasty. Look at examples of movements, political movements and religious movements, that built up their own legitimacy and that built up a constituency, not by glorifying themselves, not by making promises they can't deliver on, not by this kind of snake oil salesman, positive thinking, visualization, lose weight, make money, not by any of that cult bullshit, but by having a really sincere engagement with real world issues through active research, informed opinion, debate, coming back and admitting when you're wrong about something. YouTube would be a wonderful platform for that. And there should be a vegan voice. There should be a plurality of vegan voices, both on a global level and engage with the reality in particular places, like Chiang Mai, Thailand, like Ottawa, Canada. Gotta say, we got a lot of talented people on YouTube right now talking about veganism. We can talk about something a lot more meaningful than bikinis and bicycles. We can make it happen.